Hello and welcome to the No Ceilings NBA Draft Show. Today is a deep dives episode. I am your co-host Nick Agar Johnson, and with me, as always, is my co-host Paige Otto. Paige, how are you doing this fine evening?
I'm doing great, Nick. I finally have Wi-Fi in my apartment after a week, so that's why we didn't have an episode last week. So I can't wait to talk hoops with you.
I will be fair and say it was originally entirely my fault, and then it was entirely Comcast's fault, which one of those two things can be anticipated, the other not so much.
Yes, it's like when you wake up and then you have an email the day of, like, "Hey, your Wi-Fi is going to be out today." Okay, cool.
Always,
And for someone that
always,
works
yeah.
from home, it's like, okay, like I can go to like other places, but still, like, I mean, recording an episode, like you don't want to do it in like a coffee shop.
Yeah, it's I think that's considered antisocial in most places. Anyway, we have two exceptionally different players to cover today, so I think we should hop right in and talk about maybe the two most different prospects we've talked about on this podcast. If not, it's got to be pretty close. Shall we go ahead?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so the first player up for this week is the guy that you chose in Rueben Chinyelu. So, Paige, why don't you give us the rundown on why you decided to go with Chinyelu for this week?
Yeah, I picked him because he is your ultimate garbage man, right? I mean, he is the king of second possessions, and he's a monster on the glass. And, he's 6'10", 270 pounds with a massive 7'7" wingspan. And he is just a force to be reckoned with. I mean, he set the single season rebounding record at Florida this year. He is just a monster on the glass. And to go dive into the numbers a little bit, he's averaging 11.3 points, 11.7 rebounds on 58.70 and 70.6 shooting splits. Obviously, he's only taken 2 3-point attempts this year, his most ever attempts in his career. But with him, though, it's interesting because he's averaging a double-double, and he's only averaging 24 minutes per game doing so. And with him, for his size and length, Nick, he is a very fluid mobile athlete, and he can cover the ground in a lot of ways that you couldn't really see in other big men his size. Yes, he's averaging a double-double, and his defensive rebounding rate is over 30%, which is absurd. And then obviously that clip when he was guarding Phylon that surfaced and went viral. I mean, his footwork, his poise, his control, he has such a sturdy and steady base and his confidence shows too. I mean, I mentioned that he's a garbage man, but like he is everywhere on the floor. And a lot of the rebounds that he gets too are, from second possessions, right? I mean, he doesn't have the greatest touch around the rim. He's a good finisher, right? He's not the best, but he does have some solid touch to his hook shots, his baby hook shots that, is intriguing to me, but it's not like out of this world, right? I mean, most of his, points at the rim, he's either going to play, bully ball back to the basket type of ball or off second possessions, from his own missed shots, that lead to, secondhand rebound opportunities and second possessions for his team, right? He's not going to really go out of his way. And then he's not really a great playmaker, right, as well. I mean, he can make the first read and play kind of some two-man action, especially with Condon here and there. Like he'll hit the occasional cutter or, kick out. But I mean, it's not anything, crazy, right? I mean, if you look at his assist to turnover ratio, it's not the best, right? I mean, he has 42 turnovers to 20 assists on the season. He's also averaging 2.9 fouls per game in 24 minutes too, which is also a little concerning when, he is so productive on the offensive end and on the offensive glass, and especially the defensive rebounding glass too. But, if he was out there for 30 or more minutes, 35 minutes, he could be looking at fouling out most games. And that's not what you want when you have him, with his size, his frame, with him too, and his archetype, like he is so great at one thing, right? But I still expect him at the NBA level to earn minutes, right? Even though he's not, he doesn't have like untapped offensive potential. Like you kind of know what you're going to get with him. So I think with him, it's kind of just like, hey, this is, who Rueben Chinyelu is. And you're kind of gonna, take that to the next level regarding, his offensive capabilities and everything. But as you look from year to year, he's always been available, right? I mean, for Florida's national championship run, he played all 40 games, which with him too, and you're looking at a big man, like his mix of mobility, strength, size, and his rebound capability. It's like you don't really get that a lot in availability to go along with it, but he has that.
There's a lot that you said that I want to follow up with because all of that was excellent. But there's one specific place where I want to start, which is you mentioned him playing all 40 games for last year's national championship team. It's interesting because it's not as sort of flashy or obvious, but last year we talked about two of the biggest, developmental stories of this season in Tyler Tanner and Cameron Carr. And Rueben Chinyelu is not quite on the same level, but there are a lot of similarities in terms of just the leap that he's taken from last year to this year. And it's really funny because there are two areas where I sort of want to point out first, or things that you brought up, and then something I want to circle back to on my end, so first of all, you mentioned he's listed at 6'10", 270. This is where we go back to the classic sports reference thing of on sports reference, he's listed at 245 pounds. Yeah. Here's the thing. If you look at the film from him at Florida last year to this year, he might have put on that 25 pounds just in this past offseason. And, you mentioned the fouling thing too. And yeah, it's definitely an issue that he needs to work on, but it's a continue to work on thing because, last year he led the conference in fouls, right? Like this is not someone who has ever been particularly great at sort of keeping himself out of foul trouble. But for him to, have the simultaneous increase in minutes and, basically the same foul rate, like 2.8 last year, 2.9 this year, he has gotten better at that. There's still a lot of room to grow, right? But he has gotten better at that. But you brought up the touch on hook shots, which I definitely want to circle back to. But the biggest thing that I noticed when comparing his film from this year to the film from last year, because last year he was someone who, maybe if he gets a bigger role, could break out into being a prospect. The thing that surprised me the most when I went back and looked at the film is last year they had Condon basically doing all the switching on the perimeter, and Chinyelu was pretty much exclusively a drop big. This year, Chinyelu is the guy who's switching out onto everybody. And, you mentioned the viral LeBaron Philon clip, but it's fascinating to me that this is a guy who clearly bulked up. I mean, he was getting, handled in the post pretty frequently last year. And the transformation that he's made in terms of his body is spectacular. The touch, again, we'll get back to the hook shots because I really do want to talk about that later, but it's not like he's getting to the line an aggressive amount, but shooting 71% at the line as opposed to 58% last year and 49% in his freshman year at Washington State, that's really all he needs, right? Like he doesn't need to be someone who, he's striping 17 footers, right? Like that's not what teams are going to ask him to do. And so really all he needs to do is, okay, when you get hacked, can you go to the line and make them? And he's shown that he can do that this year, not only in terms of, the increased percentage, but also the fact that he's getting to the line more than twice as often, like 2.5 times as often, essentially, from 1.4 per game last year to 3.5 this year. And as you mentioned, he's only playing 5 more minutes a game.
Yeah, you mentioned it, from Washington State his freshman year to, Florida last year, and then in his junior season with the Gators. I mean, increasing, how many times you get to the line as well, up from, let me see here. 3.5 free throw attempts per game, on average, on his career average, 2 attempts at the free throw line per game, from 58 to 70%. I mean, and he's doing that because, it's harder to, gain that muscle and still be kind of the same, stable player and, improve in that same way. And he's done all that at an exceptional rate. And with him too, one of the things that we might have to, dive deeper into is that, he's not known for his shot blocking ability, right? He has a sub 5% block rate. And if you looked at who we talked about previously 2 weeks ago, Cameron Carr, he had a 4.3 block percentage, but he's known for his shot blocking capabilities. And Cam Carr, he's 6'5", 6'6". So, Rueben is, almost 7 foot. So, factoring in that, he is a good athlete, but he's not, vertical pop athlete, polarizing big man that you would think of, like, a Jalen Duren or, a Mitchell Robinson. that can throw down these thrasherous dunks, right? He's kind of like the guy that, he's a lob threat here and there, but he's mostly going to be the garbage can man. And I keep saying that because he literally gets every single defensive rebound. I mean, from last year to this year, he's averaging more than 3 defensive rebounds per game too. Because and with his size and mobility, and he's a great sealer and staying in position, and he's so hard to box out. I mean, on the post, I mean, they can't handle him. They'll try to, wrap around him or, try to foul him too, but he just powers through, and his footwork does show that as well too. I mean, I think he's grown in that area too. I mean, we mentioned, his touch on his hook shots as well, but staying a lot more patient in the post is something I've really noticed from the past year to this year as well.
Yeah, the seals are huge. Like once he gets position, nobody can move him anymore. And I say anymore because last year, there were guys who could move him around. And I think other than just looking at the film being like, oh, he's just a bigger person than he was last year, I think the thing that jumps out at me the most is the number of times that he would be so clearly lost on a defensive possession, and you see him just like running out and jumping at 3-point shooters that he has no chance of contesting, but he's just completely out of position. And it does make me wonder, just, obviously there had to have been some changes that the coaching staff saw just purely from the fact their scheme is completely different, right? That rather than Condon being the guy who's switching on to everybody, all of a sudden it's Chinyelu. And, I think a huge part of that is that he was leaping at things last year that he had no chance at. Whereas this year, there's a lot more verticality. There's a lot more him just standing his ground, essentially, right? And, guys can't push him around like they could previously, but also that, he gets a lot of fouls, but he also gets a lot of fouls because he's contesting a lot of shots. Whereas last year, he was running into stupid fouls in a way that, everybody makes mistakes, right? I don't want to overstate the point, but he's made a lot fewer of them this year than he did last year. And, that's a huge part of why he's been able to take a leap in basically every area and keep the fouling pretty much identical. But the shot blocking thing is important, and it's very interesting that that's been almost an inverse, that he actually averaged his most blocks per game in his college career so far in his freshman year at Washington State, where he barely played. And, his foul rate that year was somehow even higher than it was last year for Florida. So, maybe he's slightly more ground bound than he was his first 2 campaigns in college, but it certainly seems like that's helping, based on the crazy rebounding numbers, based on him being able to get those seals in the post, based on basically everything except his shot blocking rates.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the biggest thing for him too is that he can stand his ground a lot more in various ways, which in the previous and his freshman and sophomore campaigns, it was kind of not consistent and steady, right? But he's been a lot more grounded, like you mentioned, especially, when he does have the ball in his hands. He's not the best ball handler by any means, right? I mean, his turnover rate obviously reflects that, but he looks a lot more patient and poised than previously, which, is a step in the right direction. He's not going to be, a grade A playmaker, right? But like having that in a big man that is a little bit more confident and has improved in that sense, year after year, is definitely a plus sign. But he's not going to be looked to do that, right? He's going to come in off the bench, provide value, add minutes that, he's averaging a double-double in less than 25 minutes per game. You're going to have that efficiency, consistency, and production with him just because, one, he's massive, right? And he is so powerful, right? And especially with Florida's lineup. I mean, you have Condon, Rueben, and then you have Micah coming off the bench. It's kind of like, you have 6'9", 6'10", 6'11", and 7'2" coming off, right? And it's kind of like, where does this end? And Florida too, I mean, their surge has been insane, over the past month in February until now. They cracked the top 5 heading into March too. I mean, they've been playing exceptional, and especially, blew out, Arkansas at home this past weekend. So, I mean, they're hitting their stride too, right? And so is Rueben as well. So it's been super fun to watch. But like I said, when I, categorize these players, especially big man, like I expect him at the next level to provide value add minutes to any NBA team, that because what you're going to get with him. And I mentioned there's not a lot of untapped potential on the offensive side, But what there is with him is a lot more confidence when he's put into these different situations that he hasn't been, in the past 2 years.
It's funny. The Florida roster is wild. It's basically a whole bunch of point guards and then Thomas Houck and then a whole bunch of centers.
Yeah.
It's like they have on Sports Reference, they have 2 guys who are listed as forwards, and it's Houck and Condon. That's it.
Yeah.
Wild how that team works. But no, I want to circle back to the hook shot stuff because this is where I think there's one particular factor that comes into play, which is something that you've mentioned in passing, but he can't really pass out of the post. And that's the kind of thing where, again, it's a question of how much he'll get to utilize what he's good at in the post if he can't make passes out of there. But the flip side of that is just, the majority of his post-up looks this year, he's taken a hook out of the post, and he's really good at hitting hooks out of the post, which is not something that has been part of his game previously. Like, he's hitting 52% of his hook shots. He's in the 73rd percentile in hit rate per synergy, the 87th percentile in terms of frequency, right? So that's what he's got. He turns to it a lot. He used that shot even more last year. He wasn't quite as good at hitting them, but still pretty solid in terms of being able to hit those hook shots. Again, it's one of those things where if he were a better passer, I would be interested in seeing if he might be able to, take advantage of smaller guys, if the ball swings that way. Again, I do wonder how much use he'll get out of that hook shot once he gets to the NBA level, but it is very encouraging in terms of the fact that his free throw numbers have gone up every year. That isn't the only touch indicator that he's doing well in, right? And, you mentioned that he's taken 2 3-pointers this year, which, is more than he'd taken in his college career prior to that. But he has 20 jump shots registered on the season, and a few of them are runners, so not even really jump shots. He has 5 catch and shoot possessions, right? He's not spacing the floor. And that's fine. You don't need him to do that. Really, it's the passing, playmaking improvements that I think will be much more of an indicator in terms of where, how, and how often he's getting the ball. Because, again, as you mentioned, he's exceptional at cleaning up garbage possessions around the basket, but you don't get fed the ball to do that, right? You kind of have to go out there and do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but with him, gaining, 20, 25 pounds too, and having that ability to move a lot more, defenders off their spots in the post, back out a little bit and, get onto mismatches. And because he's improved as a, stealer and ducking type of guy too, that's why he can utilize his hook shots a lot more and a lot more efficiently too. And because he does have, a near 7'8" wingspan too. He's able to, shoot around a lot of these guys a lot more. He feels a lot more confident in it as well, which, that wasn't the case, last year as it is this year. So that's super encouraging because, he doesn't have the best touch around the rim. He's shooting, I believe, like 66% at the rim, right? But at hook shots, 50%, right? Compared to last year. I mean, it's there. It's a little bit of like, a push that, he has a couple counters here and there with his post-up game. And then one thing I also wanted to mention too, 66% at the rim, 63% on layups, 82% on dunks, right? So a lot of his dunks, they're not polarizing by any means, right? He is a very powerful, type of prospect and player, but it's not that he's going to, run in transition and, throw down a, dunk like a Cameron Carr, that would be like, oh my God, like this guy makes it look so easy. Like he's not that type of big man. When looking at, his offensive profile, he's an outlier at, creating extra possessions. He's a good screener. He's a good, not great finisher at the rim, has that feel and encouraging feel on his hook shot. He's a great stealer, right? That's the stuff that I like about him on the offensive end. Not saying that he has like no untapped offensive potential, but like what he's shown, that's kind of where I'm at on the offensive side. But in terms of, defensive potential, I mean, the fact that he can hold his own now on the perimeter against, the top guards in the country in this loaded, guard heavy draft class is definitely an encouraging sign.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that, Florida has 2 guys in Houck and Condon who, you would think would be the guys that they would want switching. And so Chinyelu would be like, having taken the leap that he's taken and essentially pushing Condon off the spot of, hey, I'm the switchable big now, right? That is huge for his development. You mentioned the transition stuff. He's in the 10th percentile in terms of transition frequency, which I think says it all, really. It's like he is looking to, maybe he's going to grab the rebound and pass ahead to the point guard, but that's pretty much the extent of his involvement in transition, which, you'd like to see that number be higher, but also I think if you're drafting Chinyelu, you're drafting him to be a defensive piece who cleans up garbage around the rim, and anything more than that you can get is gravy. And the hook shot is, I think, if you want to be really positive about his outlook, you can say, look, his free throw percentage continues to climb at pretty respectable levels every year. The fact that he's actually taken some jump shots this year as opposed to, basically zero in years, and literally in terms of 3-pointers, zero in years prior, there's potential room to hope, but I wouldn't go too crazy in terms of expecting him to all of a sudden become a floor spacer. But, I also wasn't expecting him to put on a ton of weight and also somehow get better at guarding on the perimeter. So, it's possible, but again, I would, if we were doing the Rowan Kent, shout out to Rowan, the Rowan Magic 8-Ball thing, I would say outlook not great, but it's possible.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then in Synergy, I was just playing around with their lineup feature too. Every lineup that he's in, Florida is shooting 63% from the field. In a 3-person lineup, with Kanan, Hauk, Chinyelu, they're shooting 62.6% from the field collectively. I mean, given, at the start of the season, Alex Condon and, Thomas Hauk were first round picks, right? Obviously, Hauk is the first round pick as of now, right? Or, teetering a little bit, right? But, he's playing around a loaded front court that is also extremely productive, which also just amplifies, his production and efficiency too. And it's a lot easier for him, to play with too. And the thing about, his rebounding rate, I also saw this on Twitter. I forget who it was from, but he, in Bartovic's history, he's one of the best rebounders. He's one of 7 high major players with an above 31% defensive rebounding rate and one of 20 high major players with over an 18% offensive rebounding rate. The only other person to have both those, do you know, Nick? Or do you have a guess?
No clue.
Oscar Tshiebwe.
That makes complete sense. Yeah, that's one of those things where you hear it and it's not surprising at all. It's rare when a high major conference player leads not only their conference, but all of NCAA basketball in rebounding, and currently Chinyelu is doing that.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not something you see every day.
Yeah. And when I saw that, I was like, that makes so much sense. Like, it was like, of course, when you're looking at the numbers. But yeah, I think with him, kind of to go into our next prospect here, there's a lot to know about, Rueben, right? Like, it's not that he's going to surprise you with anything. You kind of know what you're getting with him at the next level, which is also good. But, in your shout out Rowan, like, the Magic 8-Ball thing, it's kind of like, do I bet on him, right? Or, what do I really do with him? But I think, if you're looking at the second round, he's a great value add to any team, especially if you want those productive minutes, coming off your bench, that you're going to get a guy that, plays his heart out every single night and is also available too.
Yeah, that's a huge part. So you mentioned our second prospect. Shall we move on to player number 2?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so the player that I chose for this week is Iowa State's Milan Momcilovic, and I want to get your thoughts on him, but I'm just going to give one thing up front, which is, as of right now, he is in the 100th percentile in offensive efficiency on Synergy. It's him. It's him at the very top of the list. And, we can get into some of the other parts of his game, and we will in a moment, but I just wanted to sort of lead off with that because that says a lot of the story in one sentence.
Yeah, I mean, he has the greenest of green lights to shoot the rock.
Yes.
And in Synergy too, I was, looking at his shot charts from, last year, this year. I mean, he's taken his game to such unwavering heights, Nick, especially as, elite 3-point shooter and a 3-point, level scoring threat. Yes, we'll for sure talk about the defense, right? But, for him, his skill is how he can shoot the ball and how he, can affect the game in that end. And when I was looking at his shooting chart for this year, on corner threes, on right corner threes, he is shooting 65.4% there.
It's
On
insane.
the left side, 55%. And then, you go around the arc, 50.9%, 40.9%, 53.1%. And when I saw that, I was like, holy, whatever. I'm not going to swear. We're going to keep this
fill in the
PG.
blank.
Fill in the blank. But, and then last year, 33.3% on right corner threes, 54.6% on left corner threes. So, I mean, that says it all right there. I mean, if you look at your his shot chart, green, 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 green. That's it.
Yeah. I've brought up the notion of the Derek Williams principle in the past of sometimes guys shoot crazy percentages on really small volume of three-pointers. So first of all, with Momcilovic, the fact that last year he shot almost 6 threes a game and hit them at 39.6%. He also shot 83.7% from the line. So, you look at his numbers this year, and my first instinct automatically is 51% from three. That must be tiny volume. That must be like 4 shots. Nope, he's taken 214 threes this year. And he's also hit 89% of his free throws. Now, granted, the volume on his free throws is much smaller, and we'll get into some of that momentarily, but the log line is this guy is one of the craziest shooters that I've ever evaluated. And it's really funny because, watching the film, it's like he doesn't have the prettiest shot in the world, but the thing about it is he gets it off at ridiculous angles. Like he'll be running around a screen and then just sort of jump vaguely sideways more than up and just, he's got this crazy quick release too. So even though his legs are all over the place, like the form at the top is pretty consistent, pretty insanely consistent to be entirely honest. And yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, we have talked on this here podcast before about, shooting versatility, right? Being able to make not just the standstill threes, but, be able to run off screens, be able to, catch and shoot, also be able to shoot off the dribble. So, here are just a few fun numbers. He's in the 98th percentile on spot ups. He's in the 92nd percentile off screens. He's in the 96th percentile of handoffs. And once you get into pick and roll play, the sample size is tiny, but as both the pick and roll ball handler and the pick and roll roll man, he's in the 100th percentile. Again, the sample size there is too small to draw any real conclusions, but he's taken 114 spot ups and he's averaging 1.36 points per 100 possessions, which is insane at any kind of volume. And at the kind of volume he's taking shots, it's wild. And, again, it's one of those things where I had him on my board at some point in each of the last 2 seasons, but there's a big difference between, okay, this guy's an elite shooter versus literally making more than half of his threes on like very strong volume of attempts. And, the other big thing that has changed since last year, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this in particular, but his 2-point percentage has gone up dramatically as well. And it's one of those things where I think there are reasons that some of that is a mirage, but there are also things that he's doing that he has not been doing previously in terms of just his touch in the mid-range and sort of in between. Like he's, getting his way to weird sort of 8-foot hook shots that he's converting at rates that he wasn't previously. And yeah, there's just, it's one of those things where, again, he was a pretty crazy offensive player last year, and he's just turned the dial up to like, I don't even want to say 11. It's like 13 at this point.
Yeah, I think with him too, I mean, and 69, true shooting percentage too. I mean, I think the thing with him in the mid-range as well, I mean, you look from last year to this year, let me see, yeah, 48% to, nearly 56%, is that he kind of reminds me in this way. I mean, he's also 6'8", right? And like
Yeah.
225, right? I mean, you kind of, forget that he is like your average, NBA wing, right? I mean, he looks like that on film, but like the way he moves, I mean, in his high basketball IQ and with his shooting numbers, you kind of like, okay, like he's having this ridiculous year, he's shooting lights out, but he's doing it on like a variety of shots. I mean, off DHOs, flare screens, pick and pop actions. And he is such a high IQ player. I mean, he understands, when to trap and, screen his body away from, defenders to create space or separation. He has that shot fake that he tends to go to a lot as well to create that separation, which I think last year to this year is a bigger separator. I mean, no pun intended, but yeah, creating separation from last year to this year, he's gotten a lot better at, especially in the mid range. And he's doing that, taking a few dribbles here and there. He tends to go, left 60% of the time compared to his right hand, which is really noticeable on film. But with him, he kind of in the mid range, it seems like, I don't know, he's been studying a lot more Luka tape a little bit. He kind of looks Luka-esque in the mid range just because he's stopping on a dime at, from last year to this year. It's like he's stopping on a dime. He has that turnaround jumper, fadeaway jumper, step back, and he's doing it so poised and controlled. He has such a high release too, right? So he's able to get into the paint, and because, he can score from all three levels, he's awesome at attacking closeouts too. And he's not the best athlete, right? But with his IQ, his 3-level scoring threat, he's able to convert, at such a better rate from last year to this year, is what I've been seeing so far.
I'm really glad you brought up the Luka comparison. The biggest change by far in his numbers from last year to this year is last year he was mediocre at shooting off the dribble. This year he's in the 97th percentile. And the deceleration thing is the main, driving force, I think, behind that. And it's one of those things where when you're not that great of an athlete, which, we'll certainly get into with the defense, and there's actually an offensive stat that kind of shows the lack of athleticism, but it's one of those things where, again, if you can come to a stop and they did the P3 testing on this, God, it's almost a decade ago at this point, but James Harden and Luka Doncic were in like the 99th percentile in terms of deceleration. It's like, yeah, if you can change speeds quickly enough that a guy flies past you, it's less important that you're not as good of an athlete, because really the important part is just how do I create that space that I need to get my shot off? And if I'm not doing it by blowing by guys, and I'm not doing it by being Rueben Chinyelu and just being able to shove everybody out of the way, then the easiest way to do that is to just, master that sort of deceleration stuff, master that ability of, it's not just that his handle is improved, it's that he's gotten much better at using it to get specifically to those off the dribble jumpers, which is by far the best way he's going to score in the mid range. Now, I'm very curious your thoughts. You mentioned the three-level scoring, and there is one stat that I really do not buy with Momcilovic, which is right now he's shooting 80.6% at the rim. 80.6%. Now, here's the thing. He has 31 attempts at the rim, which ranks in the first percentile in terms of frequency. There's something else that stands out to me almost as much as that, not quite as much as that. He's, as you mentioned, 6'8". He has one dunk this year. That surpasses his previous college total of 0 dunks.
Yeah.
In 3 college seasons as a 6'8" dude. This guy's not an athlete at all. And, that is much more of a problem on the defensive end than on the offensive end. But again, a significant part of his jump in 2-point percentage is that mid-range shooting off the dribble, which is hugely important to his NBA future. But like last year, he shot 58.3% at the rim. And in his freshman year, he shot 61% at the rim. I think those are much more likely numbers for what his finishing at the NBA level might look like, because honestly, I bring up the Derek Williams principle for 3-point shooting, right? His 80.6% at the rim this season to me is just the inverse of that, right? Like 31 attempts is, just barely big enough to be statistically significant at sort of the most baseline of levels. But again, when you're in the first percentile in terms of at rim frequency, it's great that you're finishing them that much when you actually get to the basket, but that's just not something that he does at a very high level. And it does make his growth as an off the dribble shooter that much more important. But I am curious about exactly how much of a 3 level guy he is, because again, those rim numbers to me scream small sample size.
Yeah, I mean, he's not actively, looking to finish at the rim, right? 10% of his shot types are at the rim. And the reason I say that he does have that 3 level scoring ability is because he knows what to do when, he has a closeout that isn't going to let him shoot, right? Because he has
Sure.
such high basketball knowledge that he's able to attack in those situations and, find his way and make, a layup or two at the rim and, finish effectively. Yes, the sample size isn't big enough, but at least he can do that. He's not, a do or die guy that's just going to live on the arc. Like he has
Sure.
shown some capability at the rim, but I mean, he's not doing, crazy finishes at the rim. He's not really a guy that, is going to do up and under layups or, like crazy finishes because he's not a great athlete, right? And he's going to struggle with length at the rim. But in those circumstances, when he's pushed off the line and, he has to take a few dribbles to, attack a closeout, he can do that, which, for the level of elite shooter that he is, a positive, right? But it's not a huge sign. Like I'm not expecting him to, obviously be an 80% rim finisher, right? But I think, being 55 to 65 is well in range because he does have that touch, at the 2 levels at an elite level. So, but, obviously going against, NBA level competition, he's going to struggle a little bit at the rim, right? Because the only times he's really attacking is when, either, the shot clock is winding down and, a closeout is coming at him and they kind of kick him off the line. He has to go to the rim or retort to that, right? Because he's not going to actively, table set for his teammates, right? Because he's not a playmaker, right? Yes, he'll make like the first read or, that occasional kick out pass outside the post because he does have tremendous footwork in the post in the mid-range too. And he does have that size, but he's not actively looking to, finish at the rim or, kick out and, play make for others because, he's only averaging, assists per game too.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the playmaking thing because that was actually the next thing I was going to ask, which is it's one of those things where he's not a high mistake player, but he's also not creating anything, right? It's like for someone who has the ball in his hands as much as he does and shoots as much as he does, averaging under a turnover per game is pretty impressive. But part of that as well is that he's averaging less than an assist per game, like 28 assists in 29 games, right? And that's not different in any sort of way from previous seasons, right? Like his career high so far was 1.2 per game his freshman year, which was he actually played more minutes per game his freshman year than either of his past 2 seasons, right? So, again, that's not something that he's doing in any sort of high capacity. I do want to get into the defensive stuff briefly because not great. Not great, Bob. And it's one of those things where the effort is there. Like he gets in a stance, he tries to, move. He's got pretty decent awareness of where he's supposed to be defensively, but man, everybody blows by him. And, it's one of those things where the one dunk in 3 college seasons is a pretty brutal sign of his verticality. The fact that he has 31 offensive rebounds total in 3 seasons of college basketball and 28 blocks in 3 seasons total. And by the way, literally the majority, 15 of those 28 blocks were in his freshman year. He has 6 blocks this year. He had 7 last year. This is not someone who has any verticality whatsoever. And that's, it is honestly encouraging that he was even hitting in the, high 50s, low 60s before this year's outlier in terms of at rim finishing. But yeah, there's no burst at all. And it's one of those things where this sounds meaner than I intend it to be, but I don't think he's an NBA player if he's not 6'8", just because teams are going to need to hide him. And it's going to be a lot easier to hide him at that size than if he was. I've brought up the example that I constantly use of how, I used Troy Daniels as an example a lot when I remembered him as being 6'6", and then Nathan pointed out to me that he was actually 6'4", and it's like, oh, that's even more difficult calculus, right? But Momcilovic is much closer to Ryan Anderson than he is to Troy Daniels, of course, the flip side is Brian Anderson was this prolific offensive rebounder, and Momcilovic has only slightly more. He only has 5 more offensive rebounds this season than I do, which says quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, his perimeter defense really, really scares me. I mean, especially when he switched out to guards, right? He kind of, as you mentioned, he just lets everyone blow by him because he expects help to be there, right? He's not actively, letting his effort show in those possessions because he can't keep up. And one of his worst habits too, Nick, is that if he's a help defender, or he's, say, his the opponent is dribbling in the paint, right, and it's kind of like a cluster in the middle, and his defender is obviously moving and rotating on the arc, getting into position for that kick out pass or whatever it may be. He actually flips his body where his back is to his defender, and he's facing the ball in the paint, which is like defense 101. Like, you want to be like equally from your defender to help, right? So, and with him doing that, it's taking him even way longer to get to that closeout, which has caused him a lot of defenses to hit wide open shots against him time and time after again, which really scares me too, because with him having such a high basketball IQ on the offensive end, why is that ever happening in games? I mean, especially against Texas Tech too. I mean, he did it like a few times. I'm like, oh my goodness, like this is not good. So yeah, that's one of the things that does scare me, because with his, capability on the offensive end, and then he's doing that on the defensive end, it's kind of like, where do we go from here? Like, why does this keep happening? Game after game. Not every game he does that, but I mean, it comes up time and time again where it's like, in his head isn't on a swivel, right? He kind of gets ball watching a little bit, or, he's stuck in rotation, and, he's not the best athlete or laterally mover too, right? So he can't, get to those rotations, or, he's kind of like the last second chance because he thinks his team and teammates are always going to be in help position, right? Which is kind of like, well, we have to be there because we can't really trust you to, defend on the perimeter because you're going to get blown past, right? So, I mean, that's my biggest concern with him. It's just that habit that he does. But yeah, I'm curious of your thoughts on that.
I think you hit the nail on the head. The thing is, he doesn't have room to spare defensively.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the athletic tools to recover. And so, again, it's like, and we've talked about this before, of effort being a huge part of it. And, again, he does, get into a stance. He does at least try and wall guys off. And that's a lot of the battle. But especially when you're coming from the kind of athleticism deficit that he's coming from, letting defenders, letting offensive players just sort of leave you turn around like that, those are steps that if he were Cam Carr, he could afford to give up. But he's not Cam Carr. He's like basically as far opposite from that athleticism wise as you could get. And so those kinds of things, and this is one of my favorite deep dives cliches of anything that at the college game is a matter of feet, at the NBA level is a matter of inches, right? And so the fact that he's already at such a deficit at the college level in terms of athleticism, those mistakes will just be magnified if, he's forced to do them at the NBA level. And so I wonder if it's a situation where, he spends a lot of time on the wing. I think a decent part of that is just, the Iowa State team that he plays for. I do wonder if NBA teams essentially say, all right, look, you're like our paint bound 4, and like just try not to make too many mistakes. But that's the thing, though, is he doesn't have the vertical pop, and he doesn't really have the foot speed. So it's not, one of those things where there are some ground bound guys who can still be really solid defenders if they can keep up with guys laterally. And the fact that he's missing both of those elements is a huge concern. I do, this is, one of those look inside of how absolutely insane I am moments, but combining Milan Momcilovic and Joshua Jefferson would make either the number 1 player in the class or like someone who would fall out of a rec league. It's really funny. And they're listed at the exact same size. They're both listed at 6'8", 220. And it's wild how completely diametrically opposed they are in basically every way.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we talked about Joshua Jefferson pretty early on this season with deep dive.
Yeah.
So I mean, they're complete opposites of players, but together they could be, incredible, right? But unfortunately, that's not reality. But with Milan too, I think, yeah, I mean, his defense really concerns me. Just because, if he had, a little bit more, athletic ability, even laterally, right? But like
Yeah.
he doesn't have laterally or vertically, then I could be like, okay, he at least has that to go off of, and I'm not too concerned of, if he's, a help side or weak side defender, right? He can actually, get to his rotations in time and at least be, an adequate, help defender at times, but not relied on. He doesn't have that, but he will earn minutes on the NBA floor because he's elite at, one great thing, right? Which is his shooting ability. And he's increased his volume right from last year to this year too. And he's doing it in various ways. Iowa State does this, ram flare type of action with Joshua Jefferson and Milan too, where like he is a good screener too, and because he has such high basketball IQ, and you mentioned that his shooting ability, he can get that thing off so fast as well.
Yeah.
But he's also great. Also has he has great balance and footwork when he's in his shot, but when he on the flip side on the defensive end, it's not really there, right? Because he kind of gets panic in those rotational situations. But like in those, types of movement scenarios, because he is such an elite movement shooter, it comes so naturally to him. And, every actions or sets that, Iowa State runs, which is, good, but it's also like, where is this on the defensive end? I can't really put in my head why that, doesn't click with him, right, in that sense, because he's shown so much. And like me and you love, high basketball IQ players, Joshua Jefferson's and just like a key example of that in a totally different way too, as a playmaker. So yeah, I mean, he's an interesting, case, right? Because, you love him for, one thing, right? But then you are kind of like, I don't really like this about him on the defensive end. So it's kind of like, what do you value? But yeah.
I'm curious what you think about this because I have used one team as my example for this for many years, and they have not been
The
as
Kings.
terrible. No, no. The example I'm trying to go for here is there's something positive and something negative, right? So I can't use the Kings because then there'd have to be something positive, right? But the example that I've been using for years is I wonder if a team like Orlando can insulate him properly. And then they got Desmond Bain. And now I'm thinking about, and this is going to sound like a shot when it really isn't, but I do wonder if Portland would be better off with having the Caleb Love and Vic Krejci minutes go to Milan Momcilovic next season because that team just crawled out of the basement in terms of 3-point percentage, replaced by, you guessed it, the Sacramento Kings. And, they have just such a stable of spectacularly gifted defensive players. I mean, Tamani Kamara, Donovan Clingan, late in his career, but still, really can be an absolute menace defensively in Drew Holiday, right? In theory, he's played more this year than he has a very long time. But if Robert Williams can continue to stay healthy, right, they have the pieces to insulate him defensively, and they desperately need 3-point shooting from anybody who can provide it. So, again, it's one of those things where as we're talking about these two spectacularly different players, pretty much every team can use a Rueben Chinyelu somewhere. It really has to be the right team for Momcilovic. And, if he goes to Portland with the 48th pick, that could look like a steal of the draft. If he goes to a team that can't insulate his defensive weaknesses, like, hey, let's go back to the well with the Sacramento Kings, it's going to look a lot different, right? Because what teams want him to do and what teams, have him out there on the floor to do, it can't be superseded by his faults. And on most of the teams in the league, I worry that the defense will overshadow the offense. But if he goes to a team like Portland, then again, he could look like, one of the steals of the draft if he just gets to go there and they say, all right, all we're asking you to do is put up shots from long range. get yourself, and especially because he's someone who gets himself open from 3-point range too, right? It's like, we're just going to throw you out there, run around screens from our absolutely massive big men and our absolutely massive forwards, and have Tamani Kamara clean up all your mistakes, and we'll be fine. Of course, the flip side of that is he kind of already has that guy, Joshua Jefferson, and it still doesn't look great. So it's a concern. It's a concern for sure. I don't mean to overstate the case, but the flip side is I just have to go back to the very first thing I said, which is 100th percentile offensively. 100th percentile.
Yeah. No, I really like the Blazers fit. And Orlando is enticing too, right? But
Yeah.
I mean, the Blazers make a lot of sense, especially, with Dame coming back as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're kind of, they're getting on the radar a lot more, right? They're kind of like, Cleanan is, having an exceptional year, Tamani Kamara, Suns legend. But, and then, obviously Drew Holiday as well. But I think, that makes a lot of sense for him because fit can be everything for some players with, the Reubens of the world, right? It doesn't matter all too much because everyone could use, a cleanup guy like him that is exceptionally efficient and so powerful in a variety of ways. And with him too, he could excel there, right? But if he were to go to the Lakers, right, he wouldn't, he wouldn't have a lot of, that defensive capability to, clean up for him, right, if he would on the Blazers, right? So, but I mean, the Lakers also can't hit a 3-point shot either, right? But you kind of have to give and take, but I like the Blazers fit a lot.
If we're talking about defenders for Portland, I am embarrassed for myself that I didn't mention absolutely my guy, Sidi Sissoko, who finally is having the breakout season that I have been hoping to see from him for a while. And the Kings had him, and they cut him for nothing, and now he's started 24 games and played in 56 for Portland and been a defensive menace and a really good passer, just like he always was. I'm not mad, really. No, not at all. Not even the tiniest bit.
And I mean, and Denny too, right? I mean, they have so many key core pieces that are hitting their stride all kind of like at the same time, kind of, but like everyone's noticing. And it's like, I think I bring up like a Pistons or Suns reference like every episode. But I mean, the Pistons had the worst record in the NBA, 2 years ago, right? And now they're first in the East. And the thing with that is that anything can happen in a year or 2 years, right? And if you get the right pieces surrounded by, players that, you have a Joshua Jefferson to, your Milan, right? You kind of have to, and that's why, we're not GMs, right? But like that's the GM's job, right? Is to have, those core pieces, around players that, can work off each other. And, look at the turnaround with the Spurs too, right? And it's kind of like we're entering this new, next generation of teams that were kind of on, the rebuilding stage for it seemed like forever that are now, at the top of the pillar, right? So it's super exciting, especially if you're, not just an NBA draft fan, but an NBA and basketball fan in general, because you're getting new faces, new breakout stars, and new teams that, would normally just be on League Pass, but now they're, on national TV, all the time too. So, everyone can watch them now, which is super exciting.
Portland has 3 players in their rotation who are over the age of 25. It's Drew Holiday. It's number 1 bet to be traded for 2 seasons in a row, Jeremy Grant. And it's Robert Williams finally healthy. Everybody else in the rotation is 25 or under. It's wild.
Wow. Yeah, that's insane. I remember when Jeremy Grant was going to be a Piston.
Well, he was, for a time. Shall we move on to quick hits?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so I aggressively cheated for this exercise because I brought up the easiest possible thing to bring up as what I wanted to talk about for quick hits. We talked about an Iowa State player, and Iowa State is playing in the game of the night against Arizona. And this is, a rematch of when did they play? They played earlier this season, and I'm trying to find when it was. Or was it? No, I'm confused. What am I doing?
Let me see.
Didn't they? See, this is where my god-awful memory really, really comes to bear.
No, they haven't played each other.
No, you're right. I was... What the heck? Anyway, scratch that. My bad. They're playing for the first time this year. the number 4 ranked Iowa State team against the number 2 ranked Arizona team. And this will be a fascinating situation to watch for two of our Deep Dives alums here in Joshua Jefferson and Milan Momcilovic, because, with Arizona, I mean, Koa Pete is not having the best stretch, but he's someone who can impose physical problems on anybody. I'm assuming that it will basically just be Joshua Jefferson trying to wall him off and keep the rest in check. But I mean, this is one of the best point guard matchups we're going to see in college basketball until the later rounds of the tournament. I mean, Tamin Lipsey against Braden Burries is absolutely must-see television. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I'm still tripping over the fact that I completely misremembered a non-existent game between these two teams. But I mean, it's the headline matchup in college basketball tonight for a reason, and it's also a great prospect game in terms of, I mean, 3 of the guys that I just named are almost certainly going to go in the first round on draft night.
Yeah, and it seems like, we talked about, I mean, we're running through, such a long list. And I mean, we started this 4 months ago for deep dives, and it's kind of like, who do we talk about now, right? I mean, it's getting to a point. We entered March. It's like there's not a lot of guys left, especially, I mean, for deep dives, right? Because we kind of talk around, second round guys, late first round. But a lot of the guys that we've talked about, Nick, have entered, first round territory, right? Braden Burries being, a prime example of that, with, kind of getting into, lottery top 10 conversations. But yeah, this is a huge game for both teams, because, after this, it's conference tournament and then March Madness and then draft, right? I mean, a lot's happening, not just this month, but the next 3 months as well. But, I'm super excited for this matchup. Obviously Arizona's coming off, a win against Kansas as well, which, DP, played as well. But I mean, they're just hitting their stride. And same with Iowa State. They knocked off Houston, and then obviously they did lose to Texas Tech this past weekend, but I mean, that was a great game as well. But yeah, I'm excited for this one. It's kind of not a late, I don't know why I'm saying late, but I guess I'm getting my days messed up, but 9 p.m. tonight, so a little after, we're done here. But yeah, I mean, this is must see. It's the best game to go off of heading into conference play. Having a premier draft matchup and, top 7 teams in the country going at it on a Tuesday night.
You're being very generous, by the way, which I appreciate. A lot of your guys have earned their way into first round pick status. Other than Flory Badunga, my agendas this season have not hit the way that yours have. So don't give me credit for that. You're the one who's nailing these picks.
But you like them too. So, I have to give we like a lot of the same type of players, but I think Milan, I think he'll have a good game today, honestly. So I'm excited to it's always fun, like when we talk about these prospects and then they play that night. And then we can either say like, oh, I said all these great things about him, and then, they kind of, didn't do as well as like we said, or maybe we were the bad luck charm, right? Because we talked about them. But hopefully that's not the case for, the players that we have covered so far this season.
For everybody listening who will be hearing this after Arizona, Iowa State, we were all in on the best guys in that game. Whoever they were, we nailed it.
Yeah, that's funny. But yeah, I think, the Big 12 too. I mean, it's going to be interesting for the conference championship, just looking ahead. I mean, it's going to be a dogfight, really. Yeah. I mean, obviously you have, Arizona, Iowa State, Houston. So yeah, I mean, it could go either way, right? But I'm so excited to kind of, end the regular season and kind of get into, the nitty gritty, do or die situations, winner, go home type of games. But yeah, I mean, it's exciting times, and it's kind of like, oh, it's March already, but then it's like we have more basketball still to go. Yeah,
that's the thing, is you and I realizing before recording, it's like, wow, it's so much later in the season than it feels like it is. But that means a whole lot of the excitement's ahead. And certainly someone, whether it be one of our deep dives guys or otherwise, will be one of the shining stars of the NCAA tournament. It happens every year that somebody it's not even overdrafted. I think it's just somebody pops in the tournament every year, and sometimes it's coming out party, and other times it's Vivek Ranadive buying in a little bit too much on Nick Stauskas. But for the most part, I mean, obviously the NCAA tournament is the time when people who aren't draft nerds and aren't college basketball fans are tuning in. So that's always fun when the audience starts expanding and it becomes more of a topic of conversation, sort of more generally, rather than just we talk about basketball all year round. So guess it's March. Here we are.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention too, they're not playing tonight, but BYU, right? I mean, they've lost the last 2 games. Obviously Richie Saunders tore his ACL, right? But I mean, this is a big stretch for AJ as well.
Yeah.
And they're 20-9, I believe. I don't know what they're ranked. They should be
I'm not sure they are ranked right now.
Okay, yeah, they must have, because they were 23. They must have dropped out of top 25.
No, you were right. I was wrong. They were 19th in the most recent poll.
Okay, yeah. But I mean, yeah, they're gonna have a lot to handle in the conference tournament, and that will say a lot heading into March. And AJ is obviously a pivotal piece in that, and obviously the loss of Saunders is detrimental, and it has been in the past 6 games. I mean, they lost to Iowa State obviously back to back. Then they won against them in that 3-game stretch, but then they lost again. So, but yeah. But I was looking at Iowa State's feed. We're all over the place, Nick, when we're talking about quick hits.
Yeah, no, we just sort of threw caution to the wind and just went for it with the quick hits. So here we are, somehow staggering our way to the end of the show.
Yeah, but they've lost, I believe, their last 5 games or so. If I were to, my real app is like bugging out, but the stretch isn't the best, right? So, and they lost to UCF. Right. And UCF is, a prime bubble team. Right. And they could have, a great run possibly in the Big 12 tournament too. So they're kind of like that sleeper team that could go far there. And in March Madness too. So it's super exciting times. But that's out of all the conferences, I think the Big 12 is definitely like the prime time tournament. And obviously, Big 10 as well, SEC. If I had to rank them, but I think Big 12 is a lot of answers that could be answered, or questions to be answered. Yeah,
it's interesting because in terms purely of prospect stuff, like the Big 12 with Darren Peterson and AJ as the headliners, and a few other prospects sprinkled in there. Obviously, Cam Carr, who we've already talked about, Tunde Yusufu, who was, I still believe, but a lot of people have dropped him down boards, and he was dropped down pretty significantly on the most recent No Ceilings board, which, spoiler alert, will be coming out soon for all of you. But it's not always the case that the best conference for draft prospects is also the best conference in college basketball. And I mean, the Big 12 is competing on both fronts this year, and I fully would have expected it to be the SEC running the show on that front, finally catching up to their football dominance. But the Big 12 has been spectacular this year.
Yeah. No, I agree. And just to correct, if there's any BYU fans listening, they've lost 3 of the last 5, not 5 straight. So I wanted to correct that.
There you go. Well, they did win one against Iowa State in there, which was easily Momcilovic's worst game of the season. He even missed a free throw. He never does that.
Yeah, and he had like 5 points, I believe. Yeah, that was his off night for sure.
Yeah, everybody has them, and unfortunately for Momcilovic, he's not exactly making it up on the defensive end. No steals, no blocks, 4 fouls. Oops. Yeah. Anyway, anything else before we wrap up?
No, all good.
All right, so she is Paige Otto. You can find her on social media at PaigeOtto_, and you can find her written work on NoCeilingsNBA.com. You can find my written work on NoCeilingsNBA.com, and I have an article in the works for Friday, which hopefully will actually be ready by the time Friday comes around. So be sure to check that out, and all of the other great work over at NoCeilingsNBA.com. As mentioned, we'll be having a big board going up pretty soon. Those of you who are No Ceilings regulars will probably know what day that's going up, but if you don't, I'll keep it a surprise for you. But if you've been enjoying the show, please feel free to reach out to us either via social media. You can find me at NBA Johnson or Paige at the handle mentioned previously. If you're listening to the podcast, please be sure to leave a rating and or a review. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any feedback regarding the deep dive specific portion of the podcast, you can feel free to reach out to us, or you can shoot me an email, nickaj.nba@gmail.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.